As you can see, I primed the two models in white using Vallejo Urethane Airbrush Primer. After the models are primed, I then move on to the base coat stage. I'm going to mix up my own custom base colour for the flesh, and to do this I use 8 parts of Thrall Flesh, 2 parts of Vomit Brown, 1 part of Bestial Brown, and 1 part of Cabalite Green. I mix all of these colours together in a spare paint pot because I'm going to be using a considerable amount of this base colour and I don't want to have to mix it up in little batches all the time. The reason I use such a strange mixture of colours is that I really want to get a nice balance between a brown sort of skin tone and a nice green tone, because I really want that nice almost mouldy sort of look on the skin, but I don't want to overdo it and make it look like an orc. Alright, so this mixture's thinned out probably around 1 part paint to around 1 to 2 parts water, probably 1.5 parts water. And basically I'm using a technique here called transparent basing. Now transparent basing is almost like a combination of base coating and like washing or glazing. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm using transparent paint, as the name suggests, to base coat the model, and what this is going to mean is in the more raised areas I'm going to have the white primer clearly showing through the base coat, which is going to produce a highlighted effect. Naturally, the more opaque paint I'm going to push with my brush into the recesses of the mini onto the lower areas, which is going to result in those areas being darker, or those areas having more opaque paint on them, which is going to result in those areas being darker, kind of the opposite of a highlight. Basically it's a quite straightforward technique. It sounds simple, it is a little tricky to get down pat. You just need to do a bit of practice just to get it working, and make sure that you have full control over your paint. If you're kind of beginning and your brush skills aren't so great and you're having difficulty controlling paint, make sure you use thinner mixers and apply several layers rather than using more opaque paint and applying less layers. And as you can see here, this is the end result. We have the basic highlights blocked out and we're ready to move on to the shading. So for the shading, I'm just going to be mixing a little bit of black into my initial base coat colour. Now I'm going to mix this into a very thin kind of mixture, very diluted paint, very transparent, and I'm just going to be applying glazes of this colour onto the recesses or into the recesses of the model. So areas underneath the model, like underneath their stomachs, underneath their heads, and any interesting cracks or crevices that I think should be a bit darker, I'm going to apply several thin layers of this paint. Now there's only a tiny bit of black in there, probably about 10%, because really, you know, black's a very powerful colour and you really don't need much of it to significantly darken down our initial colour. This stage is just really quite important because it's going to increase the definition on the model and really just up the contrast, which is going to make the model stand out more and make it look a lot more realistic and a lot more visually appealing. Alright, so I've fully shaded and highlighted all of the flesh tones on both of the models. So now I'm going to look at bringing some interest and attention to some of the nasty wounds in the flesh of some of these models. To do this, I'm using red black wash made by Secret Weapon Miniatures, and I'm just going over the entire model and selectively applying this into all of these little imperfections in the flesh tones. Some of the areas are rather larger, like the intestines hanging out of the model's stomach, but then there are smaller areas like the pustules and the other little indentations in the flesh, which you need to be a little more careful with. For some areas I'll come back with a second coat, in particular areas like the intestines where I want a more vivid red colour, but other areas like the pustules, one coat will be just enough, because all I'm wanting is just to nicely sort of outline these areas and make them look nice and disgusting. I'm now going to bring some more contrast into some of the larger sections of ripped flesh or damaged flesh, and to do this I'm going to be using another one of the Secret Weapon washes, this time the colour Amethyst, and this is just going to be applied in a fairly liberal fashion to the large wounds on the model. This is going to bring a lot more contrast into these areas, but it's also going to create very nice richness and nuance of rich colour in these areas, and this is just like I said, going to up the contrast but not dull these colours down, which is very important. If you use something like a black or a brown wash, it would definitely mute these colours and make it less visually attractive, but the purple is really going to go in there and make things really nice and rich and enhance the contrast, which is why I'm using this particular colour. You can see I've used both the red wash and the purple wash on the model's mouth, or the interior of the model's mouth, and the model's eyes, and I've done this stage just to kind of outline some of the deeper details, give the apparent effect of like the interior of the model's mouth, and just to kind of outline the model's eyes so we get that nice rich colour surrounding the eyeball, which we will paint in later. Alright, so now I'm base coating the claws and the teeth and any bone areas on the model using Bone White by Vallejo Game Color. This is quite a straightforward stage really. I'm just using, you know, a brush with a nice fine point to get in and get all these areas. And, you know, like I said, pretty straightforward, no rocket science here. Alright, so what we're doing now is we're doing a bit of shading on the claws on the model's foot, and for this we're using Secret Weapon Dark Sepia Wash. Now the reason we're doing this is, unfortunately, we're using quite a few light colours. Well, it's not unfortunate, it's just, you know, what we're doing. We've got the light flesh tone and then we've got the very light colour on the model's claws. We need a differentiation, or a separation, between these areas because they're distinctly different, but like I said, they're very similar in colour. So to do this, we're going to outline the claws with a bit of darker colour, with a bit of dark brown, and to do this we're using this sepia wash, and we're just allowing it to pool in that little recess between the nails and the other fleshy areas. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and highlight the claws and teeth, and for this I'm going to be using Menoth White Highlight and Morrow White. Obviously I'll start off with the Menoth White Highlight and then I'll do the final highlight with the Morrow White on just the brightest spots. As you can see here on the toenails, I'm just coming in and, you know, painting them in, making sure I leave some of the previous layers behind because I really want that nice brown in the recess there, and you know, I want a bit of the initial base colour there as well, just so the transition's nice and smooth. And in a minute I also start work on the teeth. They're really quick and easy to do, really. You just, basically dot in a little bit of the white and, you know, you're good to go. Very simple stuff, you know, very basic, just a bit of layering there, but it's really going to make these areas pop out. It's really going to show off the detail on the model and bring a lot more visual interest into the piece. Alright guys, so painting the eyes. Now this is a bit that everyone has trouble with. Don't worry about it though, we're going to take it step by step and I'll show you exactly what we need to do. So first off, 2D representation. Imagine this is the head of our little monster. What we do then is we've shaded in the eye socket using our washes. We'll then come in and paint the eyeball in white. We'll then paint the pupil in black, and then what we'll do is we'll finish off with a tiny reflective dot of white. Alright, so you can see here we're putting this theory into practice, and we're starting off by base coating the eye in the white, naturally leaving the shading around the edges of the eyeball that we did earlier with our washes of purples and reds. Obviously, you know, it's fine work. There's no, you know, getting around it. You are going to have brush control. You're going to have some degree of skill with using a paintbrush. It's not easy. There's no point pretending it is. But that being said, if you fully understand the steps, if you just do maybe a bit of practice on like a piece of paper, just practice doing tiny dots and little lines, you should get this down pat fairly soon. It's not, you know, hellishly difficult. It's not out of, you know, the realm of possible you know, painting skills for, you know, a beginner, and particularly on these models the eyes are quite big. There's only one of them on each guy, so these are pretty good test models or practice models for getting your eye skills up to date. Alright, so we're moving away from the eyes for just a second, and we're going to go ahead and base coat the sword. and we're using black for this. Very straightforward, just a quick and easy base coat, and then we'll move back to the eyes and use this black to paint in the pupils. Now, naturally, painting in the pupils, it's not easy. Again, it's all about brush control, and it's all about having a high quality brush. Guys, if you just have a really cheap and nasty brush, do not expect to be getting really good results. Personally, throughout this tutorial, I use 2 brushes. I switch between both of them at random points. I use an Army Painter base coat brush, and I use a Raphael size 1. Raphael brushes are, in my opinion, far superior. I just have 2 brushes on hand because I'd like to, have one, maybe I'll clean one out, I'll use some brush soap or some sort of other cleaner, and I'll use the other one, and, generally I try and use the Raphael for the finer freehanding work. And if you want to get really cheap Raphael brushes, I would advise checking out secretweaponminiatures.com because they sell them for a very good price. Alright, so the final thing to do on the eyes is to paint the tiny little white reflective dots that I demonstrated in the 2D animation of how to paint the eyes. Now, I wasn't really able to catch this on camera. It's ridiculously difficult to paint on camera, and it's really hard to get these really fine sort of detail things, like I said, with the camera jammed in your face. I haven't managed to film it. Really, the only tips I can give you is like before, high quality brush, practice your brush control, use a bit of paper or something, just practice doing little white dots. Works exactly the same as on a model. If you want to be really fancy, prime a piece of sprue or plastic art or something and paint on that. But basically, just do your practice, make sure you're getting a really fine dot in the center or slightly off center in the pupil. Make sure it does not go out of the pupil and, is kind of mixing with the white bit of the eye. That does not look good. But really, guys, if you can possibly get this sort of detail, this stage is, in my opinion, an absolute must, because this little dot of reflective light is going to add so much character to the model. You really see a massive difference between this and just painting, a black dot in the middle of your eyes. It looks so much more lifelike, so much more realistic, and just practicing this is a great kind of stepping stone to getting to more advanced methods of doing this sort of technique, doing things like colored pupils and actually highlighting and shading the centers of the eyes. It's really difficult. This is kind of a stepping stone to more advanced things, but it's a really quick and easy way of getting fantastic looking eyes, so I definitely recommend doing it if you possibly can. Alright, so now we're going to be painting the horns. Now this is one of these areas that I get asked about quite a lot. How do you paint horns? Well, to start off with, we're going to get a progression from a relatively light brown, or more of a mid-tone brown, here we're using bestial brown, all the way to a black, because the horns on these guys are going to be predominantly black. So we're going to mix this up on our palette, and we're not going to dilute the paint at all. We might do it a tiny bit, maybe, but I didn't here. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using a technique called two-brush blending. I'm not going to explain it in great detail here. I have a video on it, and you can look through other videos I've made. You will see things on this technique, but basically the idea is that you have 2 brushes. One brush you use to apply the paint, and the second brush you keep damp, and you keep this behind your ear or on your table somewhere. And basically what you do is you apply the paint to the model, you grab your second brush and you use the damp brush to kind of blend the transition between the applied paint and the base color, or the paint that's underneath that color. And essentially this is going to result in a nice smooth blend, and I apply several layers in this fashion, going from the light brown all the way to the black, until I get a nice smooth transition between what was the original flesh color and the pure black, which is going to get a very nice effect. It's going to look really smooth if executed correctly. So it's important to put a bit of time, a bit of effort in here, because if those blends look uneven and nasty, then it's going to get a really poor effect. If you don't have this kind of ability to get nice smooth blends in such a small area, then you might want to investigate doing a bit more of a feathering technique, more of a layering technique, and intentionally getting a stylized rough effect, which is designed to be that way kind of thing, like you're making the horns look rough and dusty and nasty. That'll still get a very nice looking effect. It'll get a very different looking effect, but it's still good, and it's just a bit easier to achieve that effect. To finish off the sword, I do some dry brushed highlights using this Crick's Bane couple of paints, Crick's Bane Base and Crick's Bane Highlight, and I just do some quick and easy dry brushing onto the swords of the models just to get some nice easy highlights and also give them a bit of a dusty textured appearance, which I think is pretty cool. Alrighty, so both of the minis are done, so I'm going to begin working on the base. For the base, I just use a reasonably large piece of wooden dowel, and the initial steps I do is quite simply just marking out where the models are going to stand, just using a texter, and then I drill holes where the model pins that are sticking out of the model's feet are going to go, and then I also proceed to kind of drill and hack away at the base using a Dremel tool just to get some nice uneven textures. I then spray paint the edges of the base in black, and then I just place the models on the base. I don't actually glue them down, and I proceed to glue like a twig down to the base, which is going to represent a tree. And the great thing about this is you can add little bits of twig or roots to it just using super glue to make it more impressive or interesting. So the next thing I do is I flock the base, and for this I use a mixture of like dirt and little broken up bits of twigs and roots which I collected from nature and baked in the oven for a while to sterilise them. And I also use some of the leaves made by Secret Weapon Miniatures. These are really nice leaves, and they add some really nice dimension to the base. I then mask off the edges of the base before painting it all in with the airbrush. This is quite a straightforward process, no rocket science here. And then I fully glue the minis down. It looks quite nice like that, but I then proceeded to pour in my water effects. So what I did was I made like a bit of a indentation using masking tape. As you can see here, I'm peeling the masking tape off, but basically I just wound masking tape around the base to the level where I wanted the water effect to be at. And then I simply poured in my water effects. For water effects, I used 2-part crystal clear epoxy resin, which was combined with a little bit of Secret Weapon sepia wash, as well as some bits of twigs and dirt, just to make that nice little bit of debris. And that was pretty much it. It's pretty straightforward, really. I just removed the masking tape and made sure it all looked okay. I also did a bit of a label on the miniature. I just printed out something from the computer in colour. Then I went to town with the weathering pigments and just kind of went over the whole thing. You can see I'm using Secret Weapon ones here, just using them dry, stippling them all over the place, and then later I went back and varnished it. But that's pretty much the entire model done. And yeah, I really hope you like this tutorial. I hope it's been informative. Thanks for watching, and yeah, stay tuned for more.